Hello, my name is Larry Tatum. Welcome to Volume 2 of Concepts and Principles of Self-Defense. Now this is an extremely important tape because now we're going to expand on the concepts and principles. We started in the previous tape with pushes, grabs. Now we're going into punching and kicking. When I'm done with showing you, giving you examples of the concepts and principles involved when dealing with a punch or a kick, then I'm going to go back and then we're going to start actually teaching techniques. I'm going to give you separate techniques for certain situations that could arise, such as chokes, grabs, punches, kicks, etc. But I want this tape to be one of your more important tapes to understand your targeting and what is open to you. What are your options? All right, now with the help of Rick, I'm going to start with a right punch. Rick, if you'll go to a left neutral bow. And look at our environment. We've already seen it. We don't have to worry about people behind us. We're in the studio, but that is my first consideration. Remember that, because environment dictates primarily what you're going to do, how you're going to react. All right, Rick, would you back up just a little bit here? Now, we're going to take the inside of a right punch. And this punch is going to be straight at times, and at other times I'm going to have Rick hook the punch. All right, for the sake of this technique, we'll start with a somewhat hooking, a little bit of a straight punch at the same time. Now, we're going to step in. We're going to step into a right neutral bow. Now, as I block, first thing comes to mind is not only the targets that are open to me, but what did I teach you in the other tapes, is to be aware of the unintentional moves that could happen. For instance, if I block here and I start off to a target, as I move, this is still dangerous. It's there, it's open. If I didn't hurt his arm with that initial block and I moved in, that finger could go right in my eye. No matter how hard I hit Rick, losing an eye is not worth it. All right, so from this point, as I make my block, I make sure that my left hand is up as a check. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean that both of them have to block per se. All right, later on in the techniques I'm going to show you, I am going to use a double block. But the most important thing is that in a particular move where it's hooking or it's coming around this way, is that you block at the wrist, and you could use the bicep as your first target. But as I make this move, no matter what I'm going to do after it, what my original intentions were, what I want to do as I go from here, so I've decided to chop the bicep and check at the wrist, or block at the wrist. Now, the next move, I decided to go to the neck. Now, in going there, I made sure that that hand is checked away from me. Okay, now, let's take a look at what our options are. What targeting? What do we have? Now, in the previous tapes, we learned a lot about what weapons that we have at our disposal. But what are the targets that are open? Now, I'm on the inside of this punch. Already, before I get here, I look at this as a weapon. Now, I chop the bicep. If the punch came again, I could chop the wrist. But immediately, I'm looking at this as targets. All right, now beyond this, on the inside of a right punch, with my front hand, I can use a hand sword, I can use a back knuckle, right? I can use a heel palm, and then with a claw. From the block position, I could slice the eye. I could slice it with an inverted slice. I can slip up with an elbow, right? And I can choose almost any angle with that elbow from the inside of the right punch. Can I punch with the lead hand? Well, I can do somewhat of a hooking or a rounded punch, but I can't really turn it all the way over. I'd have to take my hand to a new position and bring it back and punch. But basically, these are the moves that I can use with my lead hand. Now that's on the inside of a right, and it's above his arm. We're going to get to this down here in a few moments. But you notice now, I really don't have a whole full range of punching. Now with the backhand, I do. If you look at my backhand down here, I can punch to the ribs horizontally, invertedly as we've learned before. I can punch underneath the arm with a middle knuckle. I can use a heel palm strike. I can use an uppercut punch, a diagonal punch. So basically I do have full range of my punching with my backhand. This hand is the closest. This one offers me a better check. But that's not to say that I can't come back and check simultaneously and make my punch and check at the same time. So I can trade. But the important thing is you understand what are your options as far as your weapons, and understand where your targets are. Now, as we've learned in the previous tapes about height, width, and depth, we've got to be concerned with this. Now, if Rick comes in with that punch, and I block it, and then I decide to shoot, pop, with a hand sword to the side of the neck. If he tries to punch, go ahead. The hand sword in itself negates that punch by canceling the width of his body. It doesn't allow him to what? Pivot. He can't use that width to hit me at that point. So the strike in itself becomes a check. Now what I want to add from here, well really, the options are open. Okay? Now, let's take this a step further. Is it important to learn one set of moves and think that that set's going to work for the inside of everybody's right punch? Well, of course not. The importance is that when a punch comes, if we use this as a base, an inward block with a check, we'll call this 1, 2, 3 with the elbow, 4. Now this is working on the inside of a right punch. I've worked up in this area, now I'm traveling down to his rib cage. I'm shifting underneath the arm. Again, it's 1, 2, 3, 4. All right, those are our targets. Now, Rick shoots the punch, I make the block, but Rick decides to check out that second move. I go to chop, I can't hit it. Well, many guys, when they're blocked like this, they back off and they try something new or try to get back into the fight. Now in Kenpo, when you meet resistance, let that resistance actually propel you to the next target. So if I go 1, 2 is checked out, I can't hit it, I can go down to 4, and then back up to 2 again. Because when I dropped down to here to hit him, his hand also dropped down, and it allowed me to go back up to that target, and then right back up into what? 1, 2, 3. Now, if Rick starts to punch, and I decide to go to the ribs, but the ribs are checked, then I go back up to 2, and then so forth and on and on. And this is how you have to adapt to the situation. Don't let the situation control you. All right, now, if we take this a step further, we found that on the inside of a right punch, working primarily up here, that our hands could do almost anything, and our elbows, as well as our forearms and so forth, but we were limited to punching here. All right, so what we're going to do now is we're going to move the hand down, the lead hand, and find out what it can do in this area. Well, we found out already that we can back knuckle, we can reverse it and hand sword. Can we claw? Well, claw's all right, but the ribs can take a claw a lot easier than a face can. So can we punch with the lead hand? Well, I can come down and I can punch with a vertical punch, but I'd have to re-situate my hand to get a punch into the ribs. Rather than do that, I would go ahead and just use what? The backhand if I was going to punch down underneath the arm. All right? Now, that's the inside of a right punch. Those are some of the options. Now, you notice that when he moved, that I stayed pretty much on the right side of his body. We worked in what's called the upper quadrant. We have a lower quadrant, and the other quadrant is here, and the other quadrant is here. All right, this is how basically the guy is set up, so to speak. Now, I'm working in the upper and the lower quadrant. I haven't got down here below the waist yet, because we're going to get there in a few moments. But what can the lead hand do from this side of his body if after the first block or strike to the bicep, you don't get here in time to the neck or to the ribs or to the face? And as he starts to punch, now you're dealing with a whole new side. Now what can that lead hand do? Go ahead. You can block with it, but you haven't caused any injury yet, which is fine. Especially in the beginning stages, it's good to learn to block both arms quickly. But being a little more sophisticated as he shoots, you can go right to the source, and this is another way of checking. You're going right to the source of where the motion starts from and checking it itself. Well, it's not much of a strike, although shoot your first punch. If we go 1, it doesn't look like a strike, but if you add a little power to it, yeah, it can be a strike. Now, it does open the whole front of his body, and it does open up which hand now comes into play. Well, now we're going to have to start using the backhand, because as I check that shoulder at the source, which is a quicker way than actually wasting time to block, and it's a little more sophisticated. At this point, it opens the backhand so that you can use a slice to the eye and then a back knuckle. Now if you looked at it, I'm getting a little sophisticated now, but I want you to see what's available to you. As this hand first was the closest to the eye, so I hooked the eye, the other hand came up, caught the other eye, as the other hand what? Made a hand sword. Now what are my options from here? The arms drop, and you can see what can go on. I can drop down, use this, and so forth. So this gives you an idea now of what happens in a fight. What do you have to be concerned with? You start with one quadrant, lower quadrant here. Suddenly, you're dealing with 4 quadrants. All right, so your target now is opening up. But as your targets open up, you say, well, that's great for you, but you got to remember, as his targets open up for you, his weapons are also being employed on you. You were safer when you were this way, but you didn't react in time after the block to go to a strike, so now you have to deal with it like so. All right, now that's working on the inside of a right. Can the backhand have any effect if that left hand comes? It can. Where does it put your right hand? And notice I pivoted to a forward bow to do it. Well, it put the right hand, if you look at it, underneath my left arm. Well, it's not as tied up as it may look, because from that position, again, I can guide down my own arm and slip up and strike, say, for instance, with a back knuckle. So yeah, the back hand can come across and check as well and hit. And then you can drop in and make your moves. All right, now let's go to the inside of a left punch. Let's find out what some of our options are with our weapons, our hand weapons, and as well as what targets we have available to us, and what are the pitfalls of going to the inside of a left. Okay, Rick, with the help of Rick, he'll start from a right neutral bow. Knees are bent. Now as he comes in, we're going to work with a left hooking punch, because it's easiest to work with when you're teaching. And you're going to find something out about a left punch, is that on most people, it's their weakest side. I say most because be aware of the guy that's strong with his left as well. All right, now, as Rick shoots the left punch, I'm going to choose an extended outward block. All right? My left hand is what? It's in a position check. That means that it's where it should be. It's not too low, leaving me open for a right punch, nor is it too high, leaving me open for a low punch and a kick. So I've got to find a happy medium. If I have to choose a place to put my hand, I don't want to cock it back here, not doing anything. I'm going to get it up here to protect me. All right, now you watch it again. A little faster. When he shoots, I concentrate my rear foot stepping back, my block is synchronized, and they both meet at the same time. So timing's important. I've learned this in your other techniques and the other tapes, but remember it here that your timing is extremely important. Now what I'm going to do from here, let's find out with the lead hand first what targets are open to us and what weapons. Well, the targets, we can complement the angle of his arm, contour it. It's what we call in Kenpo. We can strike the bridge of the nose with a hammer fist. All right, that's open to us. We could slice. Okay, we could slice this way as well. It'd be a little hard on the wrist, but it could be done. So it'd be better to slice with the palm up. So now the inside of the left is dictating certain things that I can do with my hands. I can use a hand sword to the side of the neck. I could use it this way, but again, that's going to put so much pressure on my forearm and the elbow and the wrist, it could break. Again, it's dictating what type of weapon we're going to use. So it's preferred to use a hand sword with the palm up at this time. I could heel palm, right? That's open to me as well. Now this is on top of the arm, pretty much up in this area. What else can I do? I can knuckle and so forth. There's a lot of weapons open to me. The targeting, it's quite obvious what it is. What can I do with the lead arm underneath that arm? Well, I can drop a heel palm into the ribs. In doing so, I'm going to have to drop my weight a little bit to create some more power. Okay, that's open to me. Can I punch with this? Sure I can. I can punch. I have basically pretty much full range of my punching. All right, now, but we're staying pretty much underneath the arm. Let's see, I can't really slice my fingertips. I can claw, but like I said, the ribs can take a pretty good claw. I can heel palm, I can punch, I can what? I can elbow. All right, now this is nice because you can slip underneath and use your elbow. But as you're slipping underneath, make sure the other hand now is what? Is that hand goes here and the end comes up to my face, that it checks. It protects you from that happening. So the elbow can be a good strike from here. Can I circle in and hammer to the outside? I sure can, but we're going to stay pretty much on the inside and down below the arm right now. Backhand, what can I use? Now on the backhand, I got full range of punching, full range of slicing with my fingers, heel palms, whatever. I'm not restricted on that. But the inside of the arm is going to force me to do certain things. All right, now, as I said, we can block, right? Break the bridge of the nose. From here, we can come right back with a hand sword, underneath the throat, and then what? We can come right across the solar plexus at this point, shoot a forearm, and go down to the groin. Now, basically, what I'm using right now is what's called one-hand Kenpo. You notice that one hand is doing most of the work. I'm leaving the checking hand out so that you can see the strike. In reality, it would be strike and check, strike and check, strike and check, strike and check. If we got a little more sophisticated from the block, we're going to hammer, right? We can hammer, poke, chop, heel palm, and claw. As the groin shot makes him come down, he's going to come right into a claw. I can use an outward block right on the back of his head and so forth. All right, now this gives you an idea, but that's a little more sophisticated. But I'm showing you anyway so that you know what you're going to be learning. So that's called two-hand Kenpo. All right, now that's working on the inside of a left punch. Now we do have not three-hand Kenpo, but that's when we use the legs and hand both equally. We'll get to that a little bit later. All right, now, what are some of the other options open forward to us? If I block and he shoots a punch before I manage to strike, well, yeah, then I can go into another block. All right, now watch again. We have 1, 2. My checking hand still remains in the center. Or I could go 1, 2, and not use the right hand, and then use my checking hand as a what? As an extended outward block with my fingers open. That's all it is, basically. But now, if he steps back, he shoots the punch. Now, as the left starts to come, you can still widen your circle, still catch the bridge of the nose, and let that motion come down and act as a block. So you can still have your cake, so to speak, and eat it as well. Watch again. We'll do it slow. We have 1, break the bridge of the nose, still get your block. Now, instead of staying on one-hand Kenpo, where you just move from here, we start to go to two-hand. We use the opposite hand at this point, and back, and we could go down the groin shot. And if you look at that position, what stance am I in now? But a reverse bow at this point. All right, now let's go to the outside of a straight right punch. Rick will come up, start in a left neutral bow. Now I'm going to show you a number of ways to block the outside of it as well as parry it. And since we're working in this tape primarily the hands and from the waist up, now as Rick punches, I'm going to step over into a left forward bow, and I'm going to use a right extended outward. Now, first thing comes to my mind, 2 things I got to be conscious of: his foot, and I'm open. So I don't necessarily have to put a check down. I don't have to bend my knee to check, but I do have to be aware. That's the important thing. Not everybody is going to slip a kick between your legs. But you have been taught to be aware of it so that you can check it many ways. You can check it if he starts to kick with your knee. You can check it, kick with the hand. However, but be aware of it. The second thing I have to be aware of is his opposite arm. If that spins to hit me with an elbow or a back knuckle, I've got to be conscious of that. Now, there's a number of ways that I can check that. As he starts to spin, I can just roll a heel palm in, hold my forward bow stance. Normally, I'd have my hand up checking, but I'm going to leave it open so you can see what I'm doing, and check it at this angle. All right? I could wait, go ahead as he spins, and check it with a block. All right, which is fine. There's nothing wrong with that. In fact, if I check it with a block, it could break the elbow, because what happens as he swings that fist and suddenly that arm keeps locking out, this acts as a fulcrum against that, and he'll snap his own arm for you. So there are a number of ways that you can check this arm as well. All right, now, go back to the punch. So we're going to use an extended outward block. The hand is up here. Now, this is still considered my front hand. This will be our back hand. Now, what are the options open to me with my lead hand? Well, number one, I can hammer. I can slice to the eye. I can heel palm. Right? I can claw the face. I can hand sword the back of the neck. I can hand sword underneath. I can heel palm lift up underneath the hinge of the jaw, to give you an example. I have pretty much full range of my punching. All right? That's not restricted in any way. All right, now my backhand, what do I have here? I have full range. Now we're going to stay pretty much above the arm right now. But now with the backhand, I can pivot out of my forward bow, go to a right forward bow. I've got a heel palm. I've got what's called commonly a ridge hand. We'll call it a reverse hand sword. All right, I can use the back of my knuckles. If I'm any closer, I can use what? My forearm to strike. What else can I use back here? I can't really claw, or rather slice, unless I lean back just a little bit if I needed to get to the eye at this point. If he suddenly turned his head to the other side, turn your head this way a little more, then I could finger hook as well and catch this. So these are some of the options I have, say above the shoulder. Now let's go back to the lead hand. What do I have open from this position as far as the ribs are concerned? Well, obviously I can elbow. Normally I'd have what? A check up there, but I'm going to leave it down so you can see the move. I had to have an elbow strike. I could hammer to the back of the kidney. Now this is a little different way of hammering because it hooks into Rick. It circles in, and yeah, exactly. It can bring him right up on his toes as I hammer. So I have a hammer as well. What else do I have down there? Well, I can't really claw, and slicing would hurt my own fingers probably. But we've found that we can slip an elbow, we can hammer, we can use a forearm across his body. What else can I use with this lead hand? Well, I have another way of checking. If Rick starts to kick, and as he kicks, if I just push down on that joint, still in my forward bow, kick Rick, it's going to stop that leg from coming up much higher. So if it needs to be a check at that point, it's another way of checking. Remember this, you're checking at the source. Now this is similar when we went to the inside of the punches, and when he shot a left, we checked at the source at the shoulder. Well, now we're going to check it here, thinking this is no more than a large shoulder, right down in here. So these are some of the options as well with my lead hand, down to the ribs and in front. Now, you can't quite see at this angle, so I'm going to have Rick turn around. What option do I have underneath the arm on the inside of Rick's body? Well, I can reverse it. I can hammer fist, and all that does is it comes around and torques. I don't want to get a fist in the face, so as I do it, what I do is I make sure that this hand checks, so that doesn't get in my face. Now, here's another good example of checking. I want you to learn that now. I can drop down into the groin area. I can forearm, use my forearm across the midsection. I can come from here, slip up underneath and hand sword to the neck. So there's a lot of things that I can do going back into the inside as well. My rear hand, can it go to the inside? Well, if I pivot somewhat, it can come in and strike underneath the throat. It's a little sophisticated, but I want you to see what's possible. Is I can use an inverted chop and catch him this way. I can roll back and catch the groin. Or I can come around with a back knuckle, forearm, hand sword, heel palm, whatever I want to do from that angle. So yeah, I do have a pretty good range of targets and weapons with my rear hand. Now going back to this side again, knowing this, that I have now a complete circle with a right punch, the inside and the outside of this right punch from the waist up, I now have a complete circle of targets. I know and understand what my weapons are, which can be used, and what cannot be used. What angles, if I strike a target, will hurt my own arm. All right, so I've experimented enough that I know this now. All right, and this is the way that you should experiment with your targets and your weapons. I've experimented with a number of ways of checking and positioning my opponent so I don't get hit in the process. I'm concerned with my height, or his height, his width and his depth. I don't want to get kicked, so I know that this hand, if he starts to kick, curtails his height zone. If he back knuckles, this curtails his width. If he tries to move in and out or away from me, I'm going to control his depth as well. So all these things I'm understanding, and as I'm employing my defense, all this stuff is coming across for me immediately. All right, now, so if we go back, we do an extended outward block, we have what? We have a hammer fist, we have a back knuckle, right? We can come back up with a heel palm as the arm drops down. We can come back over the top, pop, with a chop, right? We can step off and bust the arm with a middle knuckle rake. And you notice that when I do this, just as I make contact, I'm using a stance change. This is going to help because it's going to help me solidify my base, give me a little more torque as I hit it from here. All right, now this is pretty much staying, again, in this circle. All right, now let's take this a step further, and let's go to the inside of a right snapping ball kick. Now I'm going to give you an idea of not only how the target's open for you, but how now your own kicks and your own hand weapons now are both going to be employed in this. Okay, now with the help of Rick, would you go to a left neutral bow? Now as I'm confronted with Rick, I'm going to look at him as 12 o'clock. There's 9, 3, and 6 is directly behind me. And we have 4 o'clock, and 4 o'clock just happens to be at a 45-degree angle in relationship to Rick. Now I'm going to choose 4 o'clock when Rick starts to kick at me. Basically, if I was to step back to 6 o'clock, go ahead, and as this kick came, and I stepped back to block it, if I'm fast enough, it'll work. I'll get that kick blocked. But I've decided to block, and I want the groin shot to be my next target with my back leg. All right, now, if that's the case, then it's important that I step to 4 o'clock, because what it does, it aligns my back foot to the groin. All right, that happens to be the target. Now the point of it is that using 4 o'clock also keeps Rick the furthest from me. This is like a circle going around here. And this is the farthest point on the circle. It's a safety zone for me, or what we call in Kenpo a zone of sanctuary. It gives me almost a foot away from Rick. Now remember to stay out of range as much as possible, but at the same time I'm within range to hit Rick. All right, now he's occupied with his foot being blocked in the air. Now my next move is to kick Rick into the groin area or lower stomach, depending upon the situation. And this has to occur in this particular technique while his foot is still in the air. It's extremely important. All right, good. Now we're going to slow this down a little bit, but as he kicks, I execute the block that we've learned before. All right, I make my kick to the groin, the arms drop. My next shot, I decided, well, I'm going to use a heel palm and or a thumb strike to the eye as I plant. Okay, now my options are opening up, the targets are wide open. I better keep a hand as a check because I don't want to get a foot up in my face or in between my legs accidentally, because when I shoved Rick back, he could throw a hand or a foot up into me. And if that happened, I better have a hand down there covering and protecting me from this. So as I came down, I went to the eye. My next shot here, I decided, well, I'm going to use the opposite hand because I don't want to waste time bringing this back just to use one hand. So from this point, I've decided, as his head comes back, to use this hand as another heel palm. Now, as that heel palm hits, this elbow also hits. Now, this is sophisticated, but you've got to understand what you have available to you. So we're from here, and then back up with the elbow to the other side of the head. All right, now, at this point, I decided, well, I'm pretty well checked. Rick's still on his feet. So I'm going to use a back knuckle strike here, but I'm going to use something simultaneously. I'm going to back knuckle and hit him in the groin at the same time. If I still want to get back into the fight, well, that's fine, because now I can use an in-place twist stance that we've learned earlier, and I can come across, make my punch, and pivot into my twist stance. Now, if I still want to continue on, I can step out into a reverse bow and heel palm, open him up and injuring the shoulder, and then apply one of my kicks at this point, and then back out. This will give you an idea now of how you're going to manipulate your opponent. All right, now let's stay on the inside of a kick a little bit, and I'm going to have Rick change the kick for me. He did a snapping ball kick. Now I want him to do a roundhouse kick about the height of my shoulder. Now, you've learned an inward block, you've learned a downward block. It's important now to put these two blocks together, and you're going to come up with what we call a universal block. Now, a universal block helps you in this regard. If Rick was to kick and I only used a downward block on a roundhouse kick that was coming up, I would block it, and then it would become, my own block would become a guide to my own defeat. It would slip right up and catch me in the face. And I've seen this at tournaments many times. Do it again, the same thing. I block it, whap, and I get hit with the leg. Likewise, if I just use an inward block on that kick, it can slip down and catch me in the solar plexus. All right, so now we need a universal block. We need a wedge in there. So if I use a downward coupled with an inward, I have this, what we call an open-end triangle. Remember that word because you'll hear it later on. But as Rick kicks, it gets caught within that wedge. It doesn't slide up past, it doesn't slide down as well. Now, using this block is no more than pushing both arms out to their respected areas. The downward block goes where it should go, the inward block goes where it should go. He creates that wedge. Now, as the kick comes, we're going to step off somewhat and find out what's open to us. Well, I'm out of reach with my hands, but I'm not out of reach with my legs. But as you've learned earlier, and you've watched how I teach, I don't have to go in here or even down to the supporting leg to begin my attack. Where can I go? Well, quite obviously, bam, I can go right there. That means that if I wanted to slip a back knuckle in and hurt the outside of the knee, I can do it. I can slip an elbow, catch the inside of the knee as well. While I catch it, you'll notice that my bottom hand hooked around from the downward block position, acted as a fulcrum, and then I could snap the knee. Now this is just to give you an idea. It's a little advanced. It takes a certain amount of expertise. But the important thing is to understand that my first attack is going to be in this area. All right, now, to make it a little simpler and a little more practical, especially for those of you that are just starting out, is that we're going to block and we can come up and kick out the supporting leg. All right, now, what happens to the target areas as I do that? Well, as I come down, if I want, we can go back, use a scoop kick, roundhouse kick. I can begin to use my hands as well. I can couple all this motion. I can sweep and stretch him out even further so that Rick truly becomes manipulated by every action that I employ. Now, when Rick shoots that kick, I make sure that peripherally I'm watching all of this. I'm not just concerned now with what's going on within this quadrant, that quadrant, the lower quadrant down here or down here, but I'm concerned with the whole image of my opponent. Now my circle just isn't this big, but now it's incorporating Rick entirely. And I've got to find out what would be the most practical at the time, which target to use next. My elbow's close, it'd be a good weapon to use. From the elbow, I don't stop there, but I can use my forearm if I have to. I've also got to be aware that I'm open down here too. So as he planted his foot, I make sure that one hand checks. Learn that checking theory, it's extremely important. You just can't come in, hit. If he takes that hit and you're left open, you're both going down. All right, now watch the kick again. If I decide to change my targets and just use my legs, that's open to me as well. If you watch what I'm doing, as he came off, I kick to the groin, kick to here, I can slice a kick or whatever. Watch the stance change. I started from a neutral, but I went to what? A cat stance. And I worked from that position. I realigned myself into another cat stance on the left side and executed and sliced across his body in this fashion. This is to give you ideas, give you examples, show you what's available to you. Now, let's go to the outside of a kick. Rick, if you'd step over here. Switch your stance, please. If he comes through with a right side kick, and I'm changing the kicks so that you get a variety. If you chose my ribs as his target, and he stepped through, and that's exactly what he's going to use, is that side kick. Remember how I told you in the other tapes that the majority of his power is being created now with a bend in his knee. Beyond that becomes a thrust and a push, right? Okay, so what we're going to do is use a downward parry into a twist stance. If you're having trouble with the twist stance, and it is used for the more adept, you could just shuffle back and stay in your right neutral bow and use your downward parry. Watch again. We'll use that part. That parries, this hand checks. What are my options? What's open to me? What's dangerous? As I move into Rick, I also could be moving into a right punch. All right? So as I move in, I'm aware of that. If the punch does come, I make sure that I check as I move in, depending on what I'm going to do. If I'm going to break the elbow or whatever. Okay, now the kick comes again. I shuffle back, use my block. Now I could cross in and just take him out. And that's no more than what? Shoot your kick. No more than rear crossover. And what stance am I in but a forward bow? That's all it is. It's footwork. And you've learned that in the other tape. It's no more than footwork. All right, now. Parry. All right, now. With my lead hand, I've got the ribs. I've got full use of the hands, full use of the punching, full use of slicing, claws, hand swords, back knuckles, elbows, whatever I want to do. Everything's open to me. My backhand is full use. It's a little bit out of range. What do I have at my exposure as far as down here? Am I exposed? Well, not so much down here. If I got too deep as I came in, he could sweep me as well. All right, that I have to be aware of. So I make sure that as I sweep, if I do get behind Rick, I'm the one who's applying the pressure at this point. Or I may just go in deep enough to where I can reach without putting myself in trouble as well. I know this is a lot to consider, but I want to get as much of it as possible. Now, if my hands are out of reach, obviously my legs may be the best thing to use at this point. It depends upon how quick and how precise my parry was. For instance, when that kick came in, if I shuffled too far back, I'm not going to rush in and use my hands. I'm going to rush in and use the closest weapon first, which will be my feet. All right? But now, if my parry was quick enough and I didn't shuffle back, quite obviously, bam! The hands and the feet are both equally applied, right? So forth. Good. So watch, look, determine when you practice with another opponent, find out what's really open to you. Now I introduced a new type of block for you. It's called the universal block. I want you to practice it. Practice it from your neutral bows. Remember, if my right leg is forward, it's a left downward and a right inward. If we switch, it's a right downward and a left inward. Now, using them universally means that they're both going to be applied at the same time. They give you a lot of protection. In particular, in tournament fighting, which we're going to get involved in, this is going to be one great defensive way to protect you, okay? Now, this is one way of keeping your guard up. This is a very defensive way of keeping it up. Learn this well. Practice with it. Switch with it. Change your stances with it. Get used to it, because we're going to use it a lot as we go on in our training. I hope you enjoyed this tape. This was the second on concepts and principles of Kenpo techniques. The tapes that we have after this are going to involve specific techniques. I'm going to take 5 techniques for a choke, 5 techniques for the inside of a right punch, 5 techniques for the outside of a right punch. I'm going to teach you 5 techniques for the inside of a left, outside of a right, inside of a right kick, outside of a left kick, and inside of a left kick, so forth and so on, so that you get a full range. But these will be specific techniques that I do want you to learn. They won't be rules, because in Kenpo there are no rules. There are only ideas. And this is for you to determine in a real situation. I'll look forward to seeing you in the next tapes.